At? Can someone email this to me and then I'll send it? Can you email me that?
Yeah, we will. Hello, everybody. I believe we are live. On behalf of the Conference Organizing Committee, welcome to 4S 2021 and the opening presidential plenary on the theme of good relations, practices, and methods in unequal and uncertain worlds. Like everyone else at this conference, we are also learning and dancing with this platform. So I thank everyone for their patience and understanding over the course of the day, as well as during this plenary. I am Michelle Murphy. I am one of the conference co-chairs, and I'm a professor at the University of Toronto, where I co-direct along with Kristen Boss, the Technoscience Research Unit. I'm a Métis from Winnipeg. And as we gather virtually, and you join us from many different places and time zones around the planet, myself and some of the other folks here are coming to you from Toronto or Toronto, and we're therefore going to begin with a land acknowledgement. Acknowledging the land is an Indigenous protocol used to respect Indigenous sovereignty and to honor the Indigenous people who have lived and worked on this land historically and in the present. Land acknowledgements do not exist in a past tense. Rather, colonialism is ongoing and current. Toronto is on the Great Lakes and is particularly on Ngani-Gichigami. It's a site of long-standing Indigenous cosmopolitan land. For thousands of years, this area has been the traditional land of the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee people, as well as the Huron-Wendat, Seneca, and most recently the Mississauga of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home of many Indigenous people and communities. It's also a great hub of Indigenous queer two-spirit life. Toronto's also just a city where many diasporas meet, where many different anti-colonial, radical, and land and knowledge traditions come into convergence. And so we honor that here today. And the theme of this conference really grows out of this land acknowledgement. We, in practice, have really tried to create a conference that comes out of lively contributions between Indigenous, Black, queer, and feminist STS that happens to flourish here in Toronto. And thus, I want to begin by acknowledging some of the people who've done important work on this conference, particularly the conference co-chairs, Beth Coleman, Patrick Keilty, and Kim Tallbear, as well as the tireless work and brilliance of the conference co-organizers who have, just been pouring so much of their vital force into this conference. And that is Don Walker, Olivia Doggett, and Van Bastian de Aruja. We thank all our colleagues who joined us on the program committee, doing reviews and many other tasks. We thank the Making and Doing Committee, chaired by Helene Mialet, the Platform Committee, chaired by the indomitable Don Walker, and the Accessibility Committee, chaired by Zoe Wool. So in inviting us to come together here to consider good relations, we simultaneously deliberate over our own practices and methods as researchers and students and learners, as well as our engagements and co-theorizations with science and technology. Relational thinking, from situated knowledge to assemblages, right, has long been a kind of centerpiece of STS work. And this conference asks us to build on this legacy of relational thinking, but not only in just its epistemic and ontological forms, but to also really elevate and highlight the question of the ethical, the political, and the processual in relation. Relation is a site of struggle. It's a site towards a horizon of something else, of a good relation, of a maybe better world, even if that horizon is never reached. And so we asked this question about good relations in the face of ongoing colonialism, in the face of infrastructures that elevate and support and prop up particular people, particular beings, particular modes, particular ways, at the expense, at the distributed expense of harms, hurts, and hostilities to others. So one of the things I hope that we keep deliberating about over these few days is the question then of how we come together to take up frameworks of responsibility, the challenge of creating solidarities that span across our difference, and sharing these kind of tactics of working towards good relations, even as they might always feel out of reach. And so it's funny to be talking about good relations as we struggle on this platform. You know, we've done our best as organizers to enact this theme in everything we do, but, you know, there's inevitable constraints, not just the pandemic, but time zones, vital force, and so on. And so during the conference, we'll be talking about good relations as we struggle on this platform. You know, we've done our best as organizers. Mute, Joan, thank you. So during the conference, we really want to invite you to join us in the project of radical hospitality. So our little squad of conference organizers cannot hope to host you nearly as well as we want. The only way we can do this is to invite you into the practice of co-hosting one another, to invite you to help us troubleshoot these tech glitches that are like exploding under Mercury retrograde right now, to help enact distributed accessibility practices where you can, to help us kind of work through what does it mean to like host good conversation, good listening together, and good learning together as we come together across these panels and sessions. So our agenda for this plenary is we are going to first hear from the Forest President, Joan Fujimura, and then we have two wonderful keynotes on the theme, and Joan will be introducing them. Then we will be ending with a kind of presentation by Patrick Keilty, a very short presentation. It's going to just try to invite you and teach you right now maybe some of the ways that you can socialize and connect using this platform. As the chair, I'm going to ask that you put your questions in the chat, and we'll have an opportunity to take up a few of the questions after the keynotes. I invite you to use the emojis. You know, as speakers, we can't necessarily see each other, and it does kind of help, I think, to like get some hearts, get some laughs, get some claps with emojis, just to kind of do this like hard work of really sharing our thoughts across virtual space. So I invite you to do that. And then we're going to end with a reception and after this. And so particularly for those of you who are building mentorship, mentee relations, we invite you to join us there, as well as if you just want to chat and kind of decompress from the conference. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Joan.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Hello? Can you hear me? Uh-oh.
I think you're good.
Oh, okay, good. Okay, thank you. So I should say that recently the presidents have been giving individual speeches and plenary speeches, and I wanted to do that especially because this theme is just so close to my heart and my work. But I'm doing caregiving, and I'm going to have to pop in and out of this session to give care to my husband. So we've organized this presidential plenary, to have two amazing speakers join in, and And so my job right now is just to thank Banu and Amade for agreeing to give a talk, you know, at a pretty late stage in planning, to thank Michelle for pushing me to organize, and I just was just so crazy that I with medical work that I just couldn't do it. So thank you all. Thank you, Dawn, for saving our technology in the Brunel Award Prize this morning. Thank you, all of the local organizing committee. I am just, you cannot know how appreciative I am for all the work you put in. So my job right now is going to just be to introduce the two speakers quickly. And I hope I am writing a paper on this topic. I want to have all of you, I want to share it with all of you so that you can help me with it. Okay, so our first, I'm going to give both introductions now because I may have to run in and out. The first speaker is Banu Subramaniam. She's professor of women, gender, sexuality studies at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. She's trained as a plant evolutionary
biologist.
Sorry? What? Can you hear me?
Ja.
Bitte zieh dir nichts an von organisatorischen Problemen.
So Banu engages as a plant evolutionary biologist in feminist studies of science and the practices of experimental biology. She's the author of Holy Science, the Biopolitics of Hindu Nationalism, which won the Michelle Kendrick Book Prize in 2020, and Ghost Stories for Darwin, the Science of Variation and the Politics of Diversity, which won the Ludwig Fleck Prize in 2016. Her current work focuses on decolonizing botany and the relationship of science and religious nationalism in India, which is a topic that we're all interested in. Her talk for today will be Remembering a Queer Planet, Tending Genealogies of Care. And then I'll also introduce Amade M'charek is professor of anthropology of science at the Department of Anthropology in the University of Amsterdam, where she acts as the director of the research group Health, Care, and the Body. Care is a common theme, you might note today. M'charek is the PI of the Race Face ID project, which connects so closely to my work on race and genomics, so I really appreciate it. She's an ERC, it's an ERC consolidator project on forensic identification and the making of face and race. She's also co-PI of the NWA project Pressing Matter, Ownership, Value, and the Question of Colonial Heritage in Museums. Her work is centered on the irrelevance of race in science and society and the material semiotics of identities. Through her recent research on migrant death, she has developed an interest in forensic methods for studying post-colonial relations, circulations, and extractions. The title of her talk today is Vital Elements, Post-Colonial Flows, and Forensics as the Art of Paying Attention. Thank you all. I look forward to your talks. And I'm muting myself.
Okay. So should I go next?
Fabulous. Banu, you're next.
Great. Thank you. So first, I just want to thank Joan for her wonderful leadership for us. And we're so sorry for what she's going through, and our thoughts are with you, during these times. And I also wanted to thank Michelle, Patrick, and all others in the organizing committee for a fabulous conference and for this invitation. I'm really honored to be here. Can I have the next slide? Dreaming of Pangaea. How to tell a shattered story. How to tell stories of a fragmented earth, not to repair the broken history into fullness, as Ocean Vuong reminds us, but to develop an epistemology and aesthetics that celebrates the fragmentary, partial, and incomplete. In Eli Clare's words, how do we crip wholeness to include that which is collapsed, crushed, or shattered? Pangaea, the singular supercontinent fractured into tectonic plates, floated into new continental formations, new formations of kith and kin. What is the story that awaits us? of a new Pangaea when the continents reunite? Old and new ecologies and evolutions will reunite. Who will be kith and kin then? What are the temporalities and relationality and relatedness? How to tell the story of a cracked and crushed earth, of a planet beset with ecological devastation, a story of people that emerged from Africa to disperse across the planet, only to be carved into biologically superior and inferior, master and slave, native and alien, colonizer and colonized. A broken story, not of a homogenized Anthropocene, but an anthropos that has to reckon with its ravaged histories of colonialism, looting at will the land of labor of others, only to retreat and now beat the thunderous drums of nationalism to secure ill-gotten spoils of conquest. In my new work on decolonizing botany, I'm exploring new genealogies. I depart from the debates of two cultures, the story where the humanities and sciences, once separated, need to be brought together anew. What is lost in this story are genealogies of care, the erasure of women of color feminists, indigenous feminisms, and post-colonial diasporic and queer feminists, who have always written more syncretic symbiotic stories that do not privilege the human. I use queer here as method that seeks to make strange and question what we know. To think, read, or act queerly is to think across boundaries, to celebrate marginality, and to destabilize the normative. Next slide. I'm speaking from Arlington, Massachusetts, from the original homelands of the Pawtucket people. Any serious project of decolonization must recognize, respect, and restore the enduring and rightful claims of indigenous peoples to their land. But first, let's examine the project of colonialism. Leanne Simpson puts it well. Next slide. What the colonizers have always been trying to figure out is, how do you extract natural resources from the land when the peoples whose territory you're on believe that those plant, animal, and minerals have both spirit and therefore agency? And the answer is, you use gender violence to remove indigenous peoples from their descendants from their land. You remove agency from the plant and animal worlds. And finally, you reposition Aki, or the land, as natural resources for the use and betterment of white people. Next slide. In reconstructing history of botany, feminism, and the planet, I draw on four key theorists: Eve Tuck, Toni Morrison, Sylvia Wynter, and Maria Puig de la Bella Casa, each of who offers us a critical tool for remembering. Next slide. First, Eve Tuck. In queering our tales of life on Earth, we must, as Eve Tuck insists, move away from damage-centered research. Research that obsessively documents pain and loss to explain underachievement or failure. A pathologizing approach in which oppression singularly defines a community. Because these damaged narratives then become grounds for recuperative strategies for correction in order to bring marginal communities into normative fields of modernity. In this talk, I use the case study of invasion biology to reflect on genealogies of care to envision decolonizing botany. The second theorist, Toni Morrison, and the evocative concept she develops in Beloved, rememory. Next slide. A term she uses as both a verb and a noun, which turns the present of narrative enunciation into the haunting memorial of what has been excluded, excised, evicted. Rememory, as Vivian Salehana argues, next slide, is preserved in institutions, branded upon their violently structured bureaucracy, and practiced upon the bodies of the colonized by the bodies of the colonizers. In her Black feminist hauntology, the figure of the ghost neither confirms nor denies the metaphysical. The past is not merely the past, but a place to make deeper discoveries, as satisfying as they are disturbing, reaffirming our shared humanity. In Morrison's, ghosts do not return, they are imminent to space. Remembering opens up the past, lessons of care that violent legacies of colonialism have erased, invisibilized. It opens up registers of memory, echoing what Christina Sharp calls, next slide, wake work, a way of reflecting that avails us particular ways of re-seeing, re-inhabiting, and reimagining the world. Remembering resists the impulse to wholeness. and celebrates partiality. It centers care and justice as key elements of memory. Remembering opens up that past. Textures of lost memories in flesh, in the sinew, in the pores of the living and the dead, the ghostly afterlives of Malthus, Darwin, and Linnaeus, in restored tales for life on Earth. Next slide. Thinking of invasion biology through the histories of empire reveals a profound botanical amnesia. Empire, it turns out, is as central to non-human worlds as human worlds. Where humans went, plants, animals, fungi, bacteria, and viruses went. What if we refuse the binaries of nature culture and think empire through nature cultures and trace the shared histories of colonial migration? Next slide. Indeed, environmental historians have argued that we should understand imperialism as fundamentally an ecological project in which humans, plants, and other species were shuffled around the earth in schemes for colonization and conservation. In the early modern period, botany, for example, was big science and big business, critical to Europe's ambitions as a colonial trader. Colonialism ushered a massive and grand reshuffling of global biota. Indeed, it would be accurate to characterize colonial expansion as the original bioinvasion. One can and should understand the botanical sciences as a significant legacy in the afterlives of empire. Colonialism fueled an extractive economy through the objectification, commodification of the colonized world and the destruction of local knowledges. In its place, the colonial order installed the biological sciences as the universal abstract and expert knowledge. Local ecologies were transformed by colonial logics. Colonial roots of plants include the famous spice trades, lumber resources, plantation crops, horticultural specialties, and troves of agricultural plants and animals. Horticultural societies and gardens across the West cultivated the exotic and curious. As a result, in most countries, agriculture includes predominantly foreign plants and animals. Thinking of contemporary invasion biology alongside colonial botany brings into stark focus the hubris of colonial logics. During colonial rule, there was a laissez-faire attitude to unlimited mobility across borders. Next slide. For example, in the late 19th and early 20th century, the USDA had an active program where biologists were sent as explorers across the globe to find new and interesting plants of economic and aesthetic interest. Dr. Douglas Fairchild, director of the USDA's section on seed and plant introduction, from 1898 to 1928, is said to have introduced himself more than 112,000 species and varieties into the United States. Next slide. As Alfred Crosby argues, the roots of European domination of the Western world lie in their creating new Europes wherever they went. Also critical is the cost of this. Settler colonists ravaged native populations of humans, plants, and animals. In the context of the history of empire, the rise of the discourse of invasive species is particularly ironic. As colonialism ushered in new landscapes of empire and new formations of nature cultures, nativist thinking re-engaged with national borders, with immigration and quarantine laws that restricted entry to the foreign. Indeed, the discourse of invasive species remains a prominent feature of the environmental afterlives of empire, as waves of nationalisms consumed post-colonial worlds and colonial nations moved to secure their borders. Next slide. Here, the third theorist, Sylvia Wynter, is clarifying. Next slide. In her genealogical exploration of Western thought, she identifies two key representational figures of man. Man one, a homo religiosus, emerged from theological order of knowledge of pre-Renaissance Latin Christian medieval Europe, a figure that opened up man two, a bourgeois figure of liberal monohumanism from the 19th century that she also calls homo economicus. Wynter's figures illustrate the project of colonialism and how academic disciplines were shaped by the logics of empire, grounded on a foundational anti-Blackness. Race in her conception is central to Western humanism, a foundational anti-Blackness we can trace to 1492. The project of colonialism was the proliferation and naturalization of homo economicus. Next slide. It should come as no surprise then that after centuries of global expansion and ecological decimation of the planet, as independence movements swept colonized nations, colonial nations that ushered the original bio-invasion should now retreat to their homeland and close their borders to new immigrants. Tracking the histories of invasive rhetoric allows us to understand how plant and animal quarantine laws developed alongside national exclusion acts. Next slide. Indeed, we see a national rewriting of history when the white settlers anoint themselves as the new natives, relegating all others as foreign and undesirable. There is no pristine Eden here, no purity, no corner untouched by colonialism and its afterlives, and the rapacious tentacles of modernity. Indeed, while the powerful have only now discovered an impending apocalypse, the colonizers have long lived through apocalyptic nightmares of settler and neo-colonialism. Theirs is a story of survival. I re-narrate this abbreviated history to highlight both the hubris of empire and its subsequent amnesia that consolidates the colonial project and prevents us from a true botanical reckoning with our colonial past. Invasion biology is entirely a project of colonial nostalgia and return. Thinking colonialism and environmentalism together, we see how both consolidate the central figure of Homo economicus. Next slide. This brings me to the fourth theorist, Maria Puig de la Bella Casa. In her Matters of Care, next slide, drawing on Donna Haraway's theories of situated knowledge, she explores how we can think with care by outlining a series of 3 concrete moves. First, she argues we need to think with care by acknowledging the interaction and relationality in our nature-cultural world. Second, that we need to dissent with by opening up models of care, especially those that take on conflict, difference, and incommensurability. Finally, thinking for warns us of the risks of fetishization and appropriation in attempts to act on behalf of other humans or non-humans. She helps us understand how Homo economicus produced modern-day green consumerism founded on a privatized model of care and an individualized biopolitical morality. Next slide. Together, Tuck, Morrison, Winter, and Bella Casa remind us that any botanical reckoning necessitates methodologies of care through both a project of re-memory that unravels Homo economicus and at the same time opening up new and old epistemologies and ontologies of multi-species entanglements. These theories force us to recognize that academic disciplines and subdisciplines developed and consolidated through colonialism have produced structures of coloniality, nomenclatures, taxonomies, epistemologies, ontologies, methodologies, and methods sanctified by Enlightenment logics. Disciplines prove efficient apparati for colonial extraction. Thus, it should not surprise us that the original colonial bioinvasion is followed by the science of invasion biology. How do we, as Eve Tuck urges us, move away from damage-centered framework to a desire-based framework, where we don't fetishize damage and degeneration, but celebrate survival and regeneration? Here, if we move from a politics of nostalgia of invasion biology to a politics of Michelle Murphy's alter life or Bella Casa's alter biopolitics, we move to recognize the dynamism of nature cultures, invoking Spivak's planetarity as a relational ethic that reconfigures the collective into not just human, but more than human worlds. A true biological reckoning must acknowledge that we are all migrants now, all refugees of a ravaged nature cultural past, seeking to salvage our nature cultural present and futures. The constructions of native, aliens, migrants, and refugees are all political constructions of the unequal afterlives of empire. The ravages of empire have transformed not only human and cultural landscapes, but also ecological ones. So no species is well adapted anymore. We are all displaced, no longer living in the worlds we grew up in. Our environment's no longer familiar. We are all refugees, albeit in a very unequal and hierarchical worlds. The rise of the global right bespeaks a global anxiety about place. Indeed, the world that might feel like home might be thousands of miles away on another continent. Reckoning with the false borders and boundaries of nations and nationalisms are not only about human worlds, but increasingly also about our co-inhabitants of the planet, the plants that feed us, the fabrics that clothe us, and the lumber that houses us. We need to tend new methodologies of care and new nature cultural imaginations for our rural lives. Next slide. Thank you. Thank you.
so much, Banu. I appreciate that. That was lovely. Humans. I think we're going to move now to our second speaker, and then we'll collect questions and have a discussion at the end. So, Amade, you're next.
Ooh.
And
Ooh,
we have
hi
people
there.
here to help you share your screen as needed.
Yes, it tells me that it is failing to share my screen. It says at the bottom, failed to share screen. Can I do anything about that?
Can someone help? What happens when you press share screen?
It says failed to share screen.
Yeah, I think this is because you need to actually set your preferences in your Mac to allow you to share screen, but we can do what Banu did and have Ed share your slides if they're in, yeah, just send Ed the slides. So I'll try to email the two of you together and you can share your slides with Ed.
Okay.
Perfect.
Apologies.
Thank you. This is the kind of mutual aid that is going to make this conference make or break this conference. Is this ongoing mutual aid?
Okay, good.
Okay, fabulous. Hopefully we'll be set in a moment. Thank you, everybody, for your patience. Gives it gives us a chance to digest Banu's words.
Okay, I'm gonna simply send it to all of you.
Fabulous.
Let's see.
I'll just forward it to Ed, although I've done the email introduction, but whatever works for you, we'll get it to Ed for sure.
Okay.
Patrick, okay. So here it comes. Let me check. Yeah, it's all there.
Okay.
It is sending now. Apologies.
Wonderful. Also some appreciation of Banu's paper in the chat. Ed saying, send him some love. This tech is hard. He has been working so hard for us today. That's very true. Okay.
Oh, good.
Hopefully we'll be set in just a moment.
Is there a workaround because I'm having trouble sending it now?
He's just waiting on your email.
I'm gonna try again to share screen because I'm working on. It tells me that it's failing.
So your email is
Lord.
sending it, is that right?
Ed's asking if you're on a Mac. Are you on a Mac?
I am on a Mac. I'm using Firefox. I switched from.
Okay. And you're not able to email?
I'm not even able to email now. This is really something.
So your computer's rebelling.
I'm gonna try again.
Okay.
Somebody wrote in the chat that you have to release your share. I don't know what that means. I'm just reading it.
Yeah. Oh, here.
What should I be
I
releasing?
think Ed has some advice, maybe.
Okay, folks, we're going to try some live debugging. So you're on a Mac, I understand.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So to enable the screen share, I think we probably need to have a look at your operating system preferences to allow your browser to share screen.
Okay.
So in the very top left corner of your screen, you should see the Apple icon.
Sure.
If you click on that, you'll then be able to click System Preferences.
I'm there.
And within the System Preferences, you should then see a little house kind of icon labeled Security and Privacy.
Yes, where is it again? Yes, there it is.
Okay, perfect. And then you'll see 4 tabs, and one of them is labeled Privacy on the right-hand end.
Yes.
So if you click on that, and on the left-hand side, you should see a big list of stuff, and one of them is called Screen Recording.
Sorry, where am I supposed to see that? Once I click on privacy?
Yep, and then there's a list of things on the left-hand side.
Yes.
And one of those should be called Screen Recording.
It doesn't. It's so I have calendars, reminders, photos, accessibility, analytics on the left-hand side. If I go to privacy.
Yeah. Do you not see screen? Do you see camera and microphone in the list?
No, it does not show that.
Okay. Side question: are you on a company-issued device, an institution device, or are you on a personal device?
It's an institutional device, but I'm not connected.
It says keep scrolling down, Amade.
Yeah, if you keep scrolling down, you might see it.
We're getting tips from the chat.
Yeah.
Okay, so
on the left, if you scroll, Amade, you'll see more things than just the microphone and contacts and stuff.
Yeah, it doesn't.
It doesn't.
So, no.
So I have the feeling that either we're on an older operating system, or your institution may have locked down your access to the system permissions to prevent you from enabling this. We've seen this before on other people's devices. So we're going back to the old technique. If you can email through your slides somehow, that's going to solve this most quickly.
And I wonder, while Amade's figuring that out, Patrick can actually, we can like change the order a little bit, and Patrick we can give Amade a few minutes, and Patrick can demo the things we wanted to demo about how to actually use the platform. And then we can circle back to Amade when we have the screen share. How does that sound?
That works.
It takes a little bit of the pressure off, maybe.
Yeah,
okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. So you can see can you see the 4S landing page? Am I sharing my screen at the moment or no? Okay, so you can see the 4S landing page. Great. So I'm just going to walk everyone through some of the features in MidSpace. Ed, feel free to correct me if I get anything wrong, because I'm still familiarizing myself with the platform. But basically, we just have a few basic things we want to share with you, and I'll also send you the link to a video that will give you even more details than I'll provide now. If you want to chat and get help or ask questions, there's a chat feature here on the right-hand side. I got there just by going up here to the top right and clicking chat here. You can also see my chats, which will take you to a coffee lounge and a front desk where we have volunteers who can help you do tech troubleshooting or find things in the platform if you're having trouble finding it. Over here on the left-hand side, you can see live now. That tells you what events are going on right now. As you can see right now, we're live streaming the presidential plenary. You can enter that and you can enter any event by just clicking on it, and it'll take you in there. And you'll then click on enter room. I've got a slightly different view right now because I'm part of this backstage. I'm part of the presidential plenary. But also on the left-hand side, you'll be able to access the program. You can see what's happening now. You can browse content by these handy little tags that we've created. You can access all of our exhibit content. That includes screenings, making and doing, and the different watch parties that are happening. I think there's one in Toronto and one in New Delhi. In the screenings section, go through and see all the different films that we're screening at the conference this year. You can also participate in a Q&A. The Q&A times are listed in the screenings, and you can screen them at any time at your convenience. You can also ask questions of the filmmakers at any point in the chat function for each film. Going back to the exhibits, you can do the same thing for making and doing. It functions the same way. So here are all of the making and doing sessions for the conference. And again, you can ask, if I were to enter one of them, you could ask questions of the folks in their making and doing presentation. Let's see, going back to our program, you can see the different publisher exhibits. This is where we're exhibiting, all the different publishers are exhibiting their books, and you're able to also chat with them. So they'll often have links to different exhibits online, links to the press, a little bit about the press. You can join the room, and you can also compose messages to the press if you want to chat with them. And then, of course, the program section has a full schedule. And while you're in there, I'll just demonstrate it. The full schedule is large, so it takes a little while to come up. It does come up eventually. It should come up eventually. Yep, there it is. Great. So one of the things that's really fantastic about this feature is the ability to star certain events. And when you star an event, as I'm going to do here, I've just starred conspiracy, coterie, contagion, other not so good relations. You'll be able to see it when you go into my stuff, my events. So that will be able to keep track of the different events that you're either part of or that you've starred. Let's see, if you go into other areas of my stuff here on the left, you'll be able to edit your profile, see any recordings. I also want to point out, especially the conference swag bag, which gives you lots of tips around accessibility, event ethics policies, tips for virtual self-care. We also link to our attending virtually page, which is on the 4S meeting website here. And that website, of course, has a whole bunch of other tips and information for you. What else did I want to say? You'll especially want to check out this page, the Attending Virtually. There's a lot of great resources and tips on that page for using the platform. One key tip that I would give to everyone, and this is where I'm going to leave you, is with this final tip, which is just to say sometimes the easiest way to do multiple things, to do screen share, or to have to be involved in both socializing and maybe a panel, is to have multiple tabs open. So what I've done right now to screen share with you is I've actually screen shared my entire browser, and that way I'm able to move within one tab while having the screen share open in another tab. So sometimes it's just a really great hack is to have more than one tab open. Okay. I think that covers it. I'll post that link again to one of MidSpace's videos that tells you more about some of what I just went over.
Thank you so much, Patrick. That's very helpful, and hopefully that helped everyone kind of figure the platform out a bit. Amade, are we good?
I hope that my presentation has arrived by now.
Okay, Ed, are we good?
I sent it through Gmail, though. It's through a different address.
Okay, we'll see. Are we ready? I guess not quite yet. Has not received anything yet. The suggestion is, can you use a Google Drive link or file sharing app? How many platforms can we get involved?
Ed, check your email one more time and see.
Yeah. Make sure it got sent. Oh, he has it now. Fabulous success. Okay.
Okay.
So I'm so happy. We can finally now hear Amade's brilliance that she's prepared to gift us. So take it away.
So is the sound okay? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, wonderful. So I'll just start and I will see when the presentation then will be shown. First, Joan, by thanking you for all the hard work for the society and also for inviting me on the panel. I wish we were on site somewhere in the world just to give you a big hug. That's what I really want to do at the moment. I also want to thank Murphy and the team and all of you for your patience and for making this happening. I hope it is worthwhile. I'm staring at my screen because I don't see the presentation appearing, but you have it. Okay. So on this rock, it reads, Aruba min hena, Europe through here. It's in Arabic. The rock can be found along the coast of the southern Tunisian harbor town Zarzis, a town not far away from the Tunisian-Libyan border. The text is cast as a road sign to help the reader orient herself. If your destination is Europe, follow the arrow. The wide open sea in front of you is the Med, and Lampedusa is only 260 kilometers ahead. Since the text is in Arabic, it is aimed at locals. However, in Zarzis, everybody knows the way. There have been thousands and thousands in the past 10 years or so that have done this crossing. So there is irony in the text, and the irony is in the crown, placed on top of the word Europe. It hints at a royal destination. Now, I want to embrace this rock full of irony to explore a different perspective on Europe and on what is called Europe's migration crisis. The rock allows me to move away from the border that has drawn a lot of attention, and rightly so, and to move to other places in the world to help us understand what we are witnessing. And second, it allows me to shift perspective from crisis, which has contributed to the further militarization of Europe's border, to chronicity and the durability of relations, colonial currents, hidden relations maybe. And finally, it allows me to attend to materialities in the relations they engender or that they are made part of, rather than focusing on ideologies and ideals that have populated the debate on migration. Now, I want to start not more than 3 kilometers away from where these rocks can be found. Next slide, please. It is summer 2019. I call Mohsen Lihideb, an artist and a friend, to go for a walk and talk, as we usually do when I am in Zarzis. It is still early, so I take a book to pass the time on the beach. But as I approach, I notice an unusual crowd of cars and a truck on the beach. My legs tremble in apprehension as I get out of the car. I walk towards the crowd and see 2 police officers towing a body from the water. More policemen are further out in the water, diverting a body away from a stretch of the beach that is popular among tourists. 2 weeks earlier, on the night of July 4th, a ship carrying 89 people on the way from Libya to Europe had sunk off the Tunisian southern coast. Only 4 people were rescued by fishermen. 85 drowned. All of them washed up on the long shore of Zarzis on that horrible day. A few days later, we were burying the bodies in a provincial cemetery. And standing outside of the burial site, I see what appears to be glistening white mountains at a distance. It is salt. The French company Cotizal harvests it from the saline flats of Zarzis, purchase it for rates that are set in the colonial era. So trucks, as you can see here, carry the salt, make the trip to the port of Zarzis several times a day. And while the bodies we buried were stopped on their journey to Europe, the salt moves easily into EU territory. Now, before moving on, let us go back to that day on the beach and wonder how these bodies ended up there on the beach. How did they end up here? I already told you one story. 89 people took the boat from Libya in the hope to reach Europe, and they were not lucky. That day on the beach, I glimpsed at the body that Ali, you can see him looking at us, I glimpsed at the body that Ali and his colleagues were pulling out of the water, the body of a young, strong man, probably from a sub-Saharan country. That man deserves a story of his own. Such a story requires a particular kind of work. For example, the work of dignifying his body, identifying it and giving it a name. This is typically the work of forensics. And in fact, it was the first time since years that the bodies that washed up on the shores of Zarzis were submitted to proper forensic examination, precisely because of the high number in which they appeared on the shores. This forensic work, also called humanitarian forensics, is an important and slowly developing practice, as a coordinated practice that is around the Mediterranean region. Next slide, please. Oh, next slide. Thank you. But here, to complicate the answer to how did these bodies end up here, I want to suggest a different understanding of forensics. And rather than simply critiquing it, which I also do, I also want to hold on to some relations, perhaps entertain good relations to it, because forensic, in fact, might help us to attend to materialities. It might help us to attend to temporalities, as it is their core business, but also to develop a taste for heterogeneous traces. Now, what you can see here at the bottom left is an artistic configuration by Mohsen Lihideb, the artist I introduced earlier, based on stuff that he collects on the beaches of Zarzis. Much of it are personal effects of migrants that did not make it to Europe alive and whose bodies or stuff washes up ashore, together with other stuff, obviously. And Mohsen uses it here in a work that connects migration and death to the death of the Amazonian forest in Brazil, a work that could be seen as an answer to the call of UNESCO in August 2019, whose emblem you can see there at the top, represented by green bottles that he collected. Next slide, please. Thank you. In studying migrant death and the post-mortem care of bodies, not only by forensic professionals, but also by fishermen, volunteers, and artists, I came to realize that forensic care for the dead involves attending to material traces other than just human remains. For example, given the large number of dead bodies that disappear to the deep sea, the human effects and waste might become indicators of the numbers of casualties. This became, for example, apparent and acute in forensic works involving hundreds of casualties of people that were trapped in a shipwreck that was studied in Sicily in 2016. To count the number of bodies, their effects, personal effect was important there. This heterogeneity of actors and traces inspired me to rethink conventional concepts of forensics and to understand the complexities of death and dying in the Mediterranean beyond post-mortem care, as to broaden the notion of forensics from an art of bringing evidence to the forum, as Eyal Weizman has it, such as in the singular event of a court case with its promise of a closure, to an art of paying attention, where the past and the future of traces is open, and where there are endless of traces that could invite attention and produce multiple accounts of reality. Multiple stories, thus. I am here inspired by the work of Isabelle Stengers, for whom attention is not a capacity, but an art that requires learning to taste, to distinguish, and to differentiate. And crucially, paying attention also works against the urgency and speed of forensics and crisis thinking. And I quote her, paying attention means slowing down and accepting that a space will open up in the midst of an urgency. So making ourselves pay attention is about making space for imagining, for checking, and tracing. It is a way to establish connections between things that we are in the habit of keeping apart. For example, the death of humans in the Med and the death of the forest in Brazil. So how did these bodies end up here? In media coverages, we often read about complexities that are folded in such questions, connecting migrant death to colonial extraction, climate change, environmental problems, etc. However, in research, this kind of complexity tends to get lost. For example, we have connected migrant death to the border and to border management regimes. And my dear colleague Thomas Spijkerboer and his team have captured this phenomenon as border death, a notion that many others, including myself, have embraced and worked with, as it underlined the fact that borders and not migration are the cause of death. And it also helped us to scrutinize the militarization of borders. But what if we would attend to dead bodies while moving away from the border? As I suggested earlier, what if we would carefully connect death, not to borders that kill, but to life and livelihood? What if we would connect dead bodies to, say, water, sea sponges, to phosphorus, all life and livelihood fostering elements? The connection that I'm after is indicated in my title, Vital Elements. And vital elements as a concept, I want to suggest, helps us to attend to the complexities in the relation between death and life fostering elements. It connects materialities, their semiotic relations, to life. As a concept, vital elements captures both an object of studies, say sea sponges or water or phosphate, and a theoretical orientation. The vital part of the concept underlies the productive qualities of objects, suggesting a form of agency that is not located in the object itself, but in the network of relations in which the object is entangled. And crucially, the concept points to the fostering of life aspects of such material objects, as well as death in their absence, so to speak. And the element part of the concept is inspired by chemistry, where elements are characterized by their affinity and tendency to connect to other compounds. And again, I am here relying on the work of Isabelle Stengers. Take water or phosphorus. Both are critical to human life, as our bodies depend on them. They are also key to agricultural livelihoods. But the two are furthermore entangled, as will become clear later. The production of phosphate requires water and negatively affects water quantity and quality for other uses. This has been a bit abstract, and I hope that you are still with me, as I want to move to give you some hints of examples of the kind of vital elements that I'm interested in, or that could be interested for us, so I hope. As this is novel research, the examples are sort of rough and raw still. Next slide, please. So let me start by these wonderful creatures, sea sponges. And we are still in Zarzis. The origin story of Zarzis, that little harbor town that I mentioned at the beginning, is populated with sea sponges as well as olive trees. Next slide, please. As the story goes, sponge divers sailed a bit, as the story goes, sponge divers sailed a bit to the north to the island of Kerkena, still in Tunisia, where they harvested the sponges, which they sold on the mainland in the city of Sfax. They then bought olive tree shoots on the island of Djerba on their way back. Djerba is just opposite of Zarzis, and then returned home to Zarzis to plant the shoots and grow olive trees. Harvested since ancient times, sea sponges remain iconic in Zarzis and are celebrated almost each summer in the Festival National des Éponges de Zarzis. And you can see the emblem of the festivals here. Next slide, please. Here you can see the French ambassador to Tunisia, Olivier Poivre d'Arvour, who's here making a plea for Tunisian sea sponges and their value, ecological, economic, and cultural value. He tells us about the bizarre difference in economic value in this video, an interview actually. The price of one sponge on the international market, Tunisian market that is approximately $1, but that's for the big one, so to speak. While the sponge of Yves Klein, with which he painted his famous blue work in Tunisia with Tunisian sponges, a replica he holds in his hand, the blue one, is now in the Museum of Modern Art in New York and is worth $80,000. Now, this discrepancy in value, in economic value, in fact, hints at multiple complexities that are related to Zarzis or Tunisian sea sponges. The fishermen who dive for the sponges encounter many problems. One is that the sea sponge diving, as well as fishery in general, has become a dangerous endeavor in the Zarzis area. This has to do with the externalization of European borders. That is, the fact that Europe is militarizing borders outside of the EU as to stop migrants as far away as possible, far away in the world as possible. This politics has helped to harden the Mediterranean sea border between Libya and Tunisia. Next slide, please. Libyan coast guards are instructed to shoot to kill if fishermen would cross the border in the sea. Tunisian fishermen are increasingly seen as smugglers. Although trafficking is of course happening, Zarzis fishermen have actually become famous for saving the lives of thousands of people at sea and carrying bodies in cases where they were no longer alive. And here you see them protesting or helping people out of the sea and protesting the racist politics of certain groups in Europe against migrants, that is. Now, the border used to be porous, it used to be permeable, so that Libyan and Tunisian fishermen shared the sea according to their expertises. The expertise for sea sponge diving is mostly to be found in the south of Tunisia. In fact, it has been the leading country in the Mediterranean commercial sponge business since colonial times. And as it happens, the Tunisian, next slide, please. Yes, the Tunisian Messoura Bank, this is where the typical red Google Map thingy is to be found. Which this bank is rich for sea sponges, is located adjacent to the Libyan Faroe Island, thus constituting a huge challenge for the fishermen to stay out of the Libyan waters. Next slide, please. A second problem, and related to the economic value of sponges, is that sponges harvested by Tunisian fishermen are typically sold at very low prices on the market of Sfax, which is in Tunisia, before they can enter the international market. And again, as they enter the international market from Sfax, they are still sold at very low prices. So there is no way for fishermen to enter international markets and get a fair price. And ironically, once on the international market, the Tunisian sponges tend to switch identity. For example, here they are sold as Greek sponges. They have higher prices, by the way, on the market there. A phenomena, this switching of identity, that is a phenomena that is more common for many of you. Might as well have consumed Italian virgin oil that actually originated from Tunisia. This gives us pause when we come to think of the highly surveilled migrants and the demand for the authenticity of their identity, right? They are criminals already by not carrying their identity papers, in their hands. So whereas the goods that enter the international market for our pleasures are happy to switch economic identity, humans coming from the same countries better not play games with their identities, because the price for such games can be very high. Now, as a species, sponges are truly fascinating. I'm not sure what is on my next slide, actually. Can I have a quick look? No, please go back. Thank you. Thanks. As a species, they're truly fascinating in ways that I cannot address here, ways that I'm eager to learn more about. With their unspecialized cells, they are capable, sponges, capable of adapting to the marine environment, changing shape and color. Also, they're heavily studied in medical practice as they contain compounds that appear to serve as medication for specific cancers. And more recently, they are also used and studied as bioindicators of pollution, and of pollution as well as of the general health of the marine ecosystem. Because sponges are filter feeders. They feed on tiny particles that are suspended in the currents. They filter these particles from the seawater that passes through the highly porous tissue that they are. And these particles are increasingly also microscopic microscopic fragments of plastic and of other pollutants. Now, in an interview that I held in September 2020 with 3 fishermen who died, one of them, Lotfi, told me, well, you cannot imagine how horrible it looks down there, and the junk covers the junk that covers the bottom of the sea. He also told me that he found even novel creatures that he had never encountered before, and he took them to the lab for further research. He did not hear about what they were, however. Next slide, please. A jump here. So what you see here is the emblem of an ecological organization that is called Stop Pollution, in English, that is. In Arabic, it reads, I want to live. And I'm really mesmerized by the emblem that they have produced there, and also by the wordings in Arabic. This organization is based in Gebes, a city not far away from Zarzis. In fact, Gebes and Zarzis share the same portion of the sea called the Gulf of Gebes. So all the fishermen fish in the same water. It is an area that was once famed for its super diversity across the board, and where fish so affluent used to jump into your fluka, into your small wooden boat, indicating that it was that doesn't compare to current day situation. Nowadays, this coast is called the Coast of Death. And the reason is related to phosphorus. Phosphorus, an element that is vital to humans, as I indicated, in which absence we would simply die. And as Isaac Asimov has it, life can multiply until all the phosphorus has gone, and then there is an inexorable halt, which nothing can prevent. So indicating how vital it is. Next slide, please. And to capture its relevance, consider phosphorus. It is the 11th most abundant element on Earth, absolutely essential for human survival, because plants need it to grow. It is found in nearly all the food that we eat and is required in our cells to function properly. It is in our bones, in our teeth. By weight, we humans are about 1% phosphorus. But the amount of accessible phosphorus on Earth is limited, and there is no artificial or synthetic phosphorus. So there you have it. This quote is part of an alarming study warning for a shortage of phosphorus due to soil erosion. We simply wash it away. Now, the vital role of phosphorus has long been acknowledged, and in ways that go well beyond specialized scientific circles. Next slide, please. I cannot oversimplify the importance of phosphorus not only to agriculture and soil conservation, but also to the physical health and economic security of the people of the nation. Therefore, the question of continuous and adequate supplies of phosphorus rocks directly concerns the national welfare. Thus, Franklin Roosevelt in 1938 in Message to Congress on Phosphate for Soil Fertility. Now, as it happens, until recently, and you know, it is still there, but the country is a chaos. But until recently, Tunisia has been the 5th largest phosphorus exporting country in the world. In April 1885, the French amateur geologist Philippe Thomas discovered rich layer of calcium phosphate in the southwest of Tunisia, near the town of Kafsa. In 1898, under French colonial rule, the phosphate-producing plant Compagnie de Phosphate de Kafsa was opened. Special infrastructure, such as railways to transport the phosphate rocks to the coast as to ship them to Europe, were built. And nowadays, these same train railways transport tourists in vintage trains to visit the inland of the country. It is an interesting picture, but I don't have it here. So to be sure, phosphate was but one of the minerals that have been extracted by the French. And as I indicated at the beginning, salt is still purchased for colonial prices by a French company. In a fast forward, in 1977, a new plant, the Groupe Chimique Tunisien, was opened in the city of Gebes to process the phosphate before it is exported. The opening of this company in Gebes was widely welcomed and viewed as a huge opportunity for employment and prosperity, a view that is still held and shared by many, even by people that are engaged in environmental policy. But the company is also increasingly viewed as a disaster, adjacent not only to the super diverse Gulf of Gebes, but also to the unique oasis by the sea, protected. It's a UNESCO monument. It has made life unlivable on various levels. The processing of phosphate proved to come at high prices. Not only does it imply the sucking away of water, depleting the quantity of water for local farmers, it has also disturbed the ecological water management system in the oasis of Gebes. And while sucking the water, the process of washing phosphorus and the wet acid refining process that comes with it, comes also with producing phosphogypsum waste, which is a radioactive compound containing uranium and radium. Now, this waste is not taken care of in any specific way. It is simply dumped in open sea. Next slide, please. Here you can see the company of Gebes, and I would like to take you to the next slide already. That is the final slide. And this is not fake. What you see there is happening. So depriving the fishermen of their livelihoods, contaminating agricultural produce, and extracting the water from aquifers is pushing people, and not only young people, but whole families out of the country into the boats that are leading to Europe. So how did these bodies end up here? This was my initial question. Connecting and relating death to life and livelihood, connecting bodies to vital elements such as sea sponges or phosphorus, My aim was not to tell a linear or causal story. My aim is not to say that because of bad economies or colonial relations, people decide to risk their life. Things are more complicated than that. But faced with unlivable situation, people in fact do take death for granted. Yet many others decide to devise novel modes of living, to develop an art of living on a damaged planet, to quote some of our colleagues. But moving away from Europe and its borders, attending to death and life-fostering elements, and to the materialities of life, might help us to produce or to devise novel stories that account for the complexities that we are faced with when we easily speak of the migration crisis. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amade. That was amazing. And also just thank you so much for giving that talk after all the technical difficulties and stresses. So extra thanks to you.
Thank you for bearing with me.
So we already have, yes, and lots of clapping. We already have a few questions. We got one question in the chat and 2 hands up. So I'm gonna begin with the question in the chat and then move to the hands. Please, folks, put their thoughts in the chat. So the first question comes from Emma Cole, and it's a question for Banu. But it kind of connects to things that Amade was just saying too, which is, as someone who's engaging with ancient DNA scientists, your framing of Pangaea makes me want to know how you theorize conventional narratives of ancient human population movements as the first colonizers that moved plants, animals, and microbes across the planet.
So I'm going to tell you the way in which I'm thinking about this, and I would love some pushback, is I'm troubled by the easy way in which the term colonizer gets used for all kinds. So they talk about plant colonizers, right? That this species of plant has colonized this place. Versus for me, colonization has a very particular meaning of a group of people who take over new land, and it's an extractive economy. They take things away from the land, take it back to grow their own nations at the expense of these other countries. So to me, when who these people are calling the first colonizers, I may call them travelers or migrants or refugees or explorers, a lot of other terms, but I would not call them colonizers. So I don't find these equivalent processes.
I'm going to go to some of the hands. The first one is Veronica, and I'm trying to admit her to come and be able to speak. Veronica, you're here. Speak, please. Veronica. Okay, we also have Olivia, and I'm bringing her over because she had her hand up. Olivia, did you want to ask a question? That seems like no. Okay, well, maybe Veronica's figuring out her tech. So I'm just looking in the chat and I see just lots of praise. I guess, what you were just asking, Banu, do you think that you need to have a nation state in order to cap the colonial accusation in that?
I think nation state is a very particular political formation, right? Mm-hmm. So I could see other formations also being colonizers, but to me, colonization is a particular process, at least the ways in which I feel a lot of us use it. So at the end, the colonizers can, they can be independents, but we can talk about neo-colonialism in that country because of the legacies of that, colonization, versus I wish had, these early migrants left their legacies, we might have a different world.
I'm wondering if anyone has any questions or comments for Amade.
Could I ask something?
Yeah, please do.
Okay. No, Amade, I love that talk, and especially I think it's really highlighting the cyclicality, of life but I also wonder in terms of scale, what do you think about the temporal scale here, the scale at which this elemental cycle is happening versus the scale of violence and human politics, and how we make sense of those two? And if you have thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you also for your wonderful talk, Banu. Scales and temporalities. I mean, this is also why I love the rock, right? Because that gives us a different dimension to time. And I like actually to think of time, beyond linear, but not just circular, but in more complicated ways. I once used ideas of the French philosopher, mathematician Michel Serres to think about a topological time and different foldings. That is, so to think of history not as something left behind, but something that is latently there and can unfold itself, and sometimes confront us, sometimes surprise us. It is there as, resonating with us. And so in that sense, to me, both narrative, narrative, material objects, these vital elements that I talked about, ways of doing things, colonial relations, the reason why people from Tunisia tend to go to France. I mean, they're not interested in Italy. They go to Lampedusa, but they go to France because there is already an infrastructure there. This is the colonial infrastructure that has been laid out and also sustained in active ways on various grounds by nation states, by individual citizens, by families. So there is a lot happening when you open that space of temporalities. There's actually a lot going on, and how that then, how that does politics or relate to the political is, I would say, specific and also related to specific situations. So I mean, for example, I was not aware of these say post-war relations that were developed between Tunisia and France until actually the migration crisis or the revolution in 2011. Then you started to see how these infrastructures had been there and became so relevant and made it possible for people to come and to go back if they wanted.
So I'm going to ask a question from Lucy Suchman from the chat, and some other people were interested in it, which is, Amade, could you say more about the migrant cemetery?
Yeah. Yes. Hi, Lucy, and thank you for the question. So the migrant cemetery is now finally open last June. It has been a collective effort of various actors, and it is now open, and people are buried in a decent place. Lucy, as you know, I have been working in this association to collect money and to help organizing the cemetery, and we are now starting the forensic process also in Zarzis, so not just for larger groups of people. When they are found, as an example that I showed here, they would be taken to the city of Gebes, which is like 80 kilometers away from Zarzis, no more, even just over 100 kilometers. So people, the police, and the officials of Zarzis are not keen on driving back and forth, also when it is pertains to one single body or two. So they get buried without further examination. So we've been pushing for a forensic process also in Zarzis to take care of these single individuals that are found there. So this is the situation where we are. And as it happens, I am flying this Friday, that is the day after tomorrow, there, and to see how we can further the process on the ground.
Thank you. There's another kind of question that's to both of you. So first was, this is from Sandra Gonzalez Santos. And first she praised both of you for your nonlinear, complicated stories. And she reflected that in both of your works, there seem to be stories where some actors have the possibility or the opportunity of acting, while others are reacting. And I'm wondering, how you feel about that framing of acting and reacting.
Yeah, shall I just say, it is of course a question that merits a bit more reflection, but just responding immediately, almost immediately. So if I think of my friend Mohsen, for example, the artist who is, intervening and developing and thinking beyond, traded paths, so to speak, versus others who feel suffocated by the situation. So of course there is a kind of security that you need to have, some solid ground that is important to be acting and to do something else. But the reason why I'm interested actually in this possibilities for life is precisely to figure this out, So yeah, I really love the title of Anat Singh and her colleagues, The Art of Living on a Damaged Planet. So how to do that? Where is that happening? And what possibilities does that hold for countering the situation or devising inventive politics to act?
Banu, I'm wondering if you have thoughts on this.
Yeah, I would only add that, sort of working with plants, it also becomes a question of reading, right? Of who is acting and not acting. How do we know who's acting or not acting? And when you're reading across species, there are so many levels of translation. And I think for me, that's why it becomes a very complicated question. Plants may be acting, we just don't know how to read it. And I think this is where I feel the tools of STS really help us go through those levels of translation so we can better answer those questions of acting and reacting.
Here's a question for Banu from Mara Desenta. You talk about invasive species discourses as reinforcing nationalism, also practices as reinforcing borders and checkpoints. Additionally, within ecology, species colonizations speak about intrinsic characteristics of species when spreading, growing, transforming, and so on. Well, I agree that invader metaphors of social effects and matter. Have you given any thought on those multi-species movements too? How can we think them differently?
I didn't fully understand the translation, the move to multi-species. What's the connection of invasive?
I think thinking more, multi-species thinking more within ecology as opposed to just species.
Of multi-species migrations?
Yeah, multi-species movements.
Well, it seems that a lot of, so I don't fully understand the question, but it seems that what, plant migrations have done is reformed community. So when plants migrate, very often they're not migrating as a multi-species assemblage, but are forming new kith and kin and forming new relationships and new communities where they go. And this becomes one of the challenges of just eradicating species because they've already formed relationships in their new places, and eradicating something now upsets a new ecosystem that's developed in many cases.
Thank you. And here's a question for Amade from Annalisa Paliza. It's a methodological question. When we link narrow narratives, for example, the border, to broader nexuses, we can look in different directions. In your ethnography, what have you found most relevant to direct your investigation or gaze to?
Hi, Annalisa, and thank you for the question. It's really pragmatic. So I focus on Zarzis. Of all the places in the world that you could focus on, I focus on this one place, and I attend to materiality. So the materialities that I find relevant and mattering and acute in that particular place, Zarzis, and start to follow from there, basically. And I was not very specific about this method, the forensics as an art of paying attention, but it comes with what I call trailing, which is a way of path creation together with your objects and subjects of research, where it's really, you allow yourself actually to be moved, let's say, intellectually, scholarly, as well as a subject, and to enter the next. It's a meandering and making of a path, and so in that sense, I'm really serious about the fact that this is about taking the time to understand and doing it a bit slower, despite the fire and the alarm and the crisis.
Mm-hmm. I think we have time for maybe one more question. So Banu, here's a question from Patrick Keilty, who wonders if you might speak to the similarities and differences between rhetorics of invasion and rhetorics of infection. Happy to hear anywhere you want to go with this.
I think that's such a great question. I'd never quite put those two together. And I think there are a lot of similarities, right? Because they both are constructed, by the biosciences in very oppositional terms. There are natives and there are foreigners, there are borders. And similarly, there's the infectious agent and there's the body that it infects. And then all the rhetoric on battle, right? So the body fights the infection. Similarly, you have similar narratives of how one should deal with invasive species. So I think there's a lot of, and it says something about these binary frameworks and these oppositional frameworks that shape the biosciences so very profoundly that perhaps it's not surprising that we see these similarities in these two very different spaces.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I see we're going to be all kicked off in 7 minutes, but I think we can squeeze in one more question, and that's from Lauren Kilgore for Amade. She was really struck by the multiple characterizations of fishermen in your work, as people have come to be framed as smugglers, as people who are now instructed to kill in the name of the state, and how they are forming, quote, good relations through actively seeking to save the lives of people crossing into Europe. And she's wondering how you think with and about how we tell stories about relation in STS work, choosing to tell stories of good relations, bad relations, relations with and against each other. In your practice, are you guided to tell stories about what relations? Like which ones? How do you decide? I mean, I guess the question is, do you feel like you're telling stories of relations?
Oh, yes. So maybe the thread there or the commonality is surprising relations. I like to be surprised myself, actually, about the possible relations that can be found out there in one way or the other, because we are engaged in them, in producing them. But yes, they can be good, they can be bad, but there are surprising links between them. I think the surprise of the linking between different narratives would be the answer.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much with that. I think what I'd like to do is get everyone to help me say thank you to these two brilliant, amazing, wonderful thinkers who've gifted us with their work this evening, and to thank Joan as Forest President, and also to just take this opportunity to once again thank all the volunteers and all the folks who are going to be working so hard over the next 3 days to help you share screens, chair sessions, get logged in, and all that good stuff. So thank you, everyone. We're going to be starting a reception after this, and especially if you have a mentor-mentee relation, come over there and we'll try to help get you connected. And Patrick showed us how to continue these conversations on the platform. And so I think even after it's over, the chat continues and you can keep talking. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Free.